Hey everybody, welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focus on the fast-moving sustainability world to help the business community better understand the sustainability and environmental challenges we face. I'm Matt Orsog, Chief Content Officer at ED4S.
Hello, I'm Nawar Al-Sadi, CEO and founder of Canada Advisors and Chief Advisor to ED4S.
We have as our guest today, Wai-Shin Chan, currently Sustainability Advisor to Metis ESG, Director of Research for Asia Research and Engagement, and formerly the Global Head of ESG at HSBC. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, well, let's jump in and I guess start with kind of a broad 50,000 feet kind of question. What originally drew you to climate and sustainable finance? And how has your perspective evolved over the years in your journey while sustainability was maturing?
Sure. I have a science background, not a finance one. I fell into finance by accident after a failed teaching career. After around 5 years of work in equity research covering the transportation sector in Asia, I was getting bored and looking to exit finance altogether. This was in 2006, and I was fortunate that my head of research at the time wanted to keep me, but in a role that no one else wanted, at climate and sustainability. I've been doing that ever since and never looked back. Now, what draws me to the climate and sustainability role is how dynamic it is. You have to stay on top of the science, the economics, the politics, societal and consumer trends, as well as the regional and cultural nuances. Things like, why do some markets care about an issue whereas another market doesn't? Or how will climate impact events affect lower income countries versus higher income ones? The vulnerabilities are different and the financing needs are different. It also meant that I was not stuck in one sector, such as transportation, because climate and sustainability, in my opinion, affect all sectors across all economies in all regions, albeit to different levels and over varying time horizons. My perspective has really evolved over the years to come to appreciate the complexities of climate and sustainability and its intersection with finance. I broadened into a global role in 2013, and it made me realize that the solutions and challenges faced in each region will be different. There's a different balance of finance, technology, geography, societal norms, and public acceptance. And managing a global team over the years has helped me to learn so much about the nuances of this balance. But there's still an awful lot of work to be done in this space, Matt.
That's great.
Well, I don't know where to start here. There are a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, but I mean, let's start with this. I mean, obviously you've gone a long way from a transportation analyst or doing equity research on transportation to moving into sustainability. And from there, you've risen through the ranks and until a few years ago, you were the global head of climate or ESG research at HSBC. So from that vantage point, right there at the top, one question that comes to mind is, what does it take to be a strong leader, ESG leader or a climate leader inside a global financial institution like HSBC? I mean, do you need soft skills? Do you need hard skills? Were there any moments where you had breakthroughs or resistance? I don't know if you can walk us through that.
Sure. I think it's very challenging. I've learned and acquired new skills over the years. One is that goals and perspectives may not always be fully aligned. I can say that back in 2006, it was very lonely and not many colleagues took any notice, let alone any interest in the climate and sustainability research. But slowly but surely, people have come to that, and I've watched it evolve and grow. For example, being moved from the last session on day 3 of a conference to the first session after the keynote on day 1. That's interesting as the interest grew. It all became quite hot after the Paris Agreement and everyone wanted a part of it, but for different reasons. One thing that I always take with me as I've evolved through the years in my career is that I've always been grounded in facts and research, and I always believed that my role was to use that research to help clients and colleagues make better decisions, financial, investment, strategic decisions, etc. So I really wanted to help those decisions incorporate more sustainability thinking. But I've discovered and learned that doesn't always occur along the same time frame. Sustainability is more or less longer term by nature, certainly not one of quarterly profits or interim reporting. So I had to learn that other people have different perspectives and to sort of use those soft skills in combination with the hard sort of research facts to sort of put that forward. I'd say that one important trait is integrity, knowing your values and basing these on research and factual evidence. And sticking to it, because
as we said, the different stakeholders have different priorities, and institutions also feel pressures from their own stakeholders, commercial interests, marketing, publicity interests. To be honest, making senior people look good when they may lack the knowledge or the real underlying commitment. If I were to give you a breakthrough moment, I think I've been doing sustainability research for a long time so when the MiFID rules came through in Europe and clients were rethinking their relationships with brokers, there were many who kept the relationship with us purely based on the sustainability research that we received. That was really, really good to hear. A less fortunate moment, a resistance moment, so to speak. I always like to be quite geeky and cover and read through all the drafts of the UN climate meetings that take place at the end of every year. I analyze the progress made on negotiating these issues and the challenges that come with trying to build consensus among 200 parties. Let's just say that it means that some COP meetings have been failures, but that's not what some firms want you to say when their CEO has their photo taken outside the COP banners or with some important person. They wanted me to say, it was amazing, but I couldn't. So integrity important there.
Good. One thing I think, a lot of folks in North America and Europe always have a hard time with in Asia is really appreciating, the many different languages and cultures and legal systems and how different it is. Here in North America, we have to deal with Canada, the US, and Mexico. And so things are pretty homogeneous. And even in Europe, mostly everything's done in English or French, and the cultures are very much intertwined. But, the little time I've spent in Asia and just the work, that I've read from there, you have to appreciate just so many different points of view, so many different languages, so many different cultures. Speak a little bit about that challenge and how, like I said, I don't think people appreciate it, but what are some of the misunderstood dynamics of trying to communicate to clients and people all over Asia, and you trying to please everyone as much as you can?
Thanks for the question, Matt. That's hard because, as you say, Asia is such a diverse region, economically, politically, geographically, culturally. I don't speak that many languages either, a couple. And so that's challenging, but it's also part of the fun. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution in terms of technology or approach. Some of the perhaps misunderstood dynamics include things like sustainability is a Western concept. It's not. But many communities in Asia rely on and are closer to nature than perhaps, in a very general sense, some more developed Western societies. Another misconception is that perhaps ESG will cost money or profits to be lower. Again, it doesn't, and actually depends on what parameters you include and the time horizons involved. One interesting dynamic in Asia that is shifting, I think, is that of the fact that Asia has to copy the West in how it does ESG. And that's not true. It not only makes it hard because the markets are so different, the regulations, the law, etc. are so different, but it also means it is less successful because it doesn't work in the same way everywhere. And I think a lot of different countries and markets in Asia began to realize this about a decade ago, that it could do things with Asian characteristics, so to speak. For example, Indonesia is at a very different stage of economic and social development from Germany, so it absolutely should have a different pathway to net zero. One change that has been apparent in the past 12 to 18 months or so, again, broadly speaking, is that we are seeing a slowdown in the progress and momentum in parts of America and Europe, regulations, the omnibus, etc. To Asia, however, that means that Europe is not as far ahead as it used to be. And it's not that it can't be caught upwards, so to speak. So there has been continued progress in Asia in terms of regulations, taxonomies, disclosure. And then, as you say, the social dynamics are very, very different as well. More economies in Asia are developing, even frontier, if I could say that, than in the West. It's absolutely fair, I think, that they raise standards of living and prioritize basic things like water and sanitation, electricity and infrastructure before they focus on sustainability. But that subtlety is that it can be achieved at the same time because the technology and the know-how is available now, whereas it wasn't always previously. And Asian countries know this and they are trying, but politics sometimes or often gets in the way. But it's a fascinating place to work.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I'm really glad you mentioned that last part where, they may, a lot of markets in Asia that are developing may be able to skip some of the dirtier steps that markets in the West took. The classic example is, landline phones in Africa. There's no such thing really. They bypass that step. Green technologies, some Asian markets may be able to industrialize a bit without the industrial as much coal or as much oil and gas. It's still there, but they may be able to skip some of those steps based on the mistakes we've made in the West.
Absolutely. The leapfrogging idea is one that's firmly in the heads of the government in a lot of countries in Asia, but most obviously sort of China and its EVs, its batteries, but we've got Korea and Singapore doing that as well. So it's an area that they're thinking a lot of, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You don't need to go through those steps, as you say. Why lay the landlines when we have mobile, even satellite technology, and why do 3G, 4G when we can do 5G? Or I hear people talk about 6G and the energy efficiencies involved in that. So it's the technology is now available, and I think sustainable development in developing economies in Asia can really embrace that.
I want to move this discussion to climate change in particular, and understanding obviously that, Asia is heterogeneous and it's impacted by climate change in different ways. But maybe just broadly, I don't know, Wai-Shin, if you can walk us through challenges that you see coming, or what are the biggest challenges that Asia would have to contend with or deal with as climate change manifests itself? We've seen this in floods in Pakistan. We had major flooding a few years ago. We had droughts in Taiwan. Now, obviously, around the world, we're seeing climate change manifest itself in different ways. How about Asia in particular? You can focus on a specific area or multiple areas, but we would love to hear your take on the challenges ahead.
Thank you, Nawar. I've always believed that climate disruptions are a function of what I like to call concentrations of risk. If there's an event that happens in the middle of nowhere, its effects are less felt, so to speak. Asia is very, very populous. I think more than half the world's population live in Asia, well over 4.5 billion. And the region is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world when it comes to these climate events, and that's a high concentration of risk. To add to that, Asian economies rely, again, quite broadly speaking, on nature. That's land and oceans, and that's a big generalization. But for example, one estimate puts roughly 2/3 of livelihoods in India relying on nature and agriculture in a wide sense. That's a lot. So the challenge is sort of raising standards of living in many Asian economies in a sustainable way. But as you say, preparing for the impacts of climate change. And that's not just the acute short-term events, the storms, floods, droughts, wildfires, and heat waves, and even cold waves. But also, more importantly, in my opinion, longer term, the slow onset events, the sea level rises, desertification, glacial retreat, ocean warming and acidification, the loss of biodiversity, these will affect communities that rely on the land and the oceans and nature a lot more because they can't really move. Tuvalu is considering, moving climate visas and climate refugees, but most countries in Asia can't move, and many of them can't just buy all the commodities and the food that their citizens require. That's physical assets. There's also non-physical assets such as health systems and education, and that takes a long, long time to build out. I think with these challenges, however, there comes opportunity. There's a lot of financial capacity building, technological opportunities here to prepare for these climate events in a way that is more harmonious with nature and development. And that's something that Asia's really embraced, is working with and through these. It's a fascinating opportunity. I just hope we don't hit a tipping point, such as sort of full glacial retreat and the rivers run dry. That would be problematic, but that's a whole other conversation.
This episode is brought to you by ED4S, the sustainability training solution designed for scalable workforce training. ED4S makes it easy to build, launch, and maintain time-efficient, role-specific sustainability training for your teams. Developed by industry experts and trusted by leading organizations worldwide, visit ed4s.org to download a free case study and see how ED4S can work for you.
Maybe just a quick follow-up on this, Wai-Shin. What you just described I mean, obviously you're a professional, you've been following this for a long time. Is the population at large aware of the risks that you've just kind of talked about? I mean, again, this is Asia is a big continent and there are a lot of people, but what is your take on the level of awareness as to these risks?
It's definitely growing. I wouldn't say they would know that is specifically climate change and attribute it to that. But definitely those who rely on land and oceans for their sustenance have definitely said, we know that the land is getting drier. We know that the crop yields are not as high. Maybe we need to change crops. They can definitely feel something is going. And as you said, the floods in Pakistan, things like that, these are acute events and they can really feel the damage that's done there. I think what is not connected when Asian economies and communities do this is how the causes of this were done by, say, fossil fuel emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, and how everyone is responsible, mainly the West, sure, but Asian economies are responsible as well to mitigate that in the future by reducing their current emissions and embracing a more sustainable way of development. So the awareness has definitely grown, but the dots might not have been fully joined. So there's a lot more education to be done there, and the onus might be on governments to do this through businesses and industries, as well as communities and the general public.
Oh, interesting, Wai-Shin. All right, now we've set the table about sustainability and climate in Asia. Now we're going to make you omnipotent. We're going to give you a magic wand and say, ask what changes would you make to, either regulation, culture, anything, in Asia. And again, broad place, lots of different things going on, lots of different languages and cultures and governments. But if we gave you that power, you could change one thing or improve one thing, what would it be?
That's a fun question. Thank you. I think it'd be quite dangerous and I'm far from it. But I think I'd like to introduce regulation that makes climate change and broader sustainability less of a compliance issue and more of one of national importance. At the moment, many organizations disclose on climate change because of compliance or even worse, marketing. So using the magic wand that you've given me, there could be legislation that obliges the region to not only grow much more sustainably, but also prepare for the impacts. And this legislation would be on the level of national emergency that puts all parts of the economy, all parts of society on a footing that helps them understand why it's required, what's involved, and how to deliver it. So industries and businesses would have, a set number of years to change their business strategies, technologies, their products and services that would be much, much more climate friendly. And consumers and society would adopt these new, call it near zero carbon ways of living, but not in a way that disadvantages segments of society, nor in a way that hinders improved standards of living. It can be done sustainably. One example, not that I lived through it, but my children are studying this in school. The Great Wars, World War II, these were issues of national, regional importance, and everyone was in on it. Everyone knew that's what they had to do and contribute to it. So if we had something similar for climate change, it being a national, regional emergency that is actually an existential crisis for some sort of island states around the world and many communities around the coast, etc. If Asia were to manage this, there would be positive contagion through other regions. But I'm waiting for you to give me this magic wand, Matt. That would be wonderful.
No, that's a great answer. And I've heard that from others, and I've just said and written about it similarly myself. Is a great analog is take World War II and just the amount of budgets in the U.S. I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but it was something like 40% of the economy was dedicated. It was like 20 to 40, something like that, dedicated to the war effort. And you just think about that now, and you can't even fathom that. Just everything was dedicated to that existential crisis at the time. And we have another one of those, but it's just not seen that way. And I think you're right. I think if a country shows leadership on that and their population gets behind it, I think that could be contagious. And, I hope someone has that magic wand, because I think that could be a catalyst that could get things headed in that direction.
You wonder what it takes to do that, Matt. And
Yeah.
sadly, or unfortunately, one of the things that it takes to do that is for very large catastrophic events to impact people's thinking. And that's not the ideal situation. You think that education and training might be a better way of doing it. But still, that's the world we live in at this stage.
I can ask for a better segue, Wai-Shin. I wanted to ask you about the educational side and the education and training side, taking consideration that ED4S is focused on capacity building and training and on sustainability and climate within financial institutions. So just bringing it back to pretty much where we started within financial institutions, what kind of training or education do you think is really most urgently needed in emerging markets or in Asia in particular to build ESG capacity and know-how within this industry?
Right. I don't think it's a knowledge issue or a facts issue, because there are many organizations and experts that can easily impart that training. Lots of studies you can read, scientific papers, literature. Instead, it's more a question of urgency and long-term thinking. In my view, the financial sector needs to get over the idea that returns trump everything else, and in as short a time frame as possible. I don't think that's correct. And so perhaps the training or education should involve a widening of the boundaries of risk so that organizations in industries take more responsibility for it, more holistically. So take a simple example, fossil fuels, classic. If you expand the risks of fossil fuels to include air pollution and climate change, then the associated costs are much, much higher. It's just that these organizations involved in fossil fuel extraction and distribution and consumption are not responsible for the societal's costs, health, things like that. And so the finance sector, I believe, along with wider society, should take that responsibility into consideration when financing projects. For emerging markets specifically, sustainability should be embedded much more thoroughly. And I don't mean tick box. That's something that frustrates me a lot. But a deepening and a widening of sustainability into financial decisions. For example, the resilience of infrastructure, physical or society, how it affects local communities or the wider economy. But what will that do over time, longer time periods, such that the development and the growth in emerging markets is built upon long-term and sustainable thinking? So it's not just, say, a plaster or a Band-Aid, as you say in North America, that will fix something or connect a place to get seemingly to the next stage of development. But it's thinking, what will this do to the next generation? And am I considering all the costs? So embedding that sustainability in education and training of financial institutions and really trying to encourage them to think long-term in their decision-making and take some responsibility for society's overall costs afterwards. I think that would really help drive ESG capacity, sustainability thinking, climate change readiness into the financial sector more.
Just so I understand you well, if I may, Matt, you said this is not a knowledge issue. So potentially these financial institutions or people working in these financial institutions are aware to some extent of these issues, but they're not asking the right questions, or is it about they need to change the way they think about things and how they're interconnected rather than have kind of the knowledge sitting in different silos? Is that maybe one way to kind of bridge what you just explained? All right.
I think that's correct. It's the knowledge is in different silos. There's not enough connectedness, but it's also a case of incentivization. If you're only incentivized by your stakeholders by short-term returns as high as possible, then the climate and sustainability issues, which are inherently longer term, are going to be much, much lower down the priority list. And they need to be at least on a par. I'm not saying they should trump everything because nothing would get done, but for sure they should be on a par and more holistically and trying to find the appropriate balance, which is different for different economies in Asia. Bangladesh, for example, has a very different societal development stage than Singapore or Korea. And so the acceptance levels would be different, but longer term, they're more vulnerable. And so financial decisions should take that into account longer term. And what are you doing in the society? It's not just financing a bridge or a toll road in Korea being the same as that in Bangladesh. There are societal differences that need to be taken into account, and thinking sustainability is a great way to incorporate that long-term holistic thinking.
Yeah, the way I look at it is kind of the concept of stewardship. And we think of that in the financial world and asset management world as stewardship of your client's assets or stewardship of the company. But it's really stewardship of the society, including nature, and realizing that your economies are just a small circle inside a bigger circle of society. And that's the small circle inside a bigger circle of, the biosphere or the environment, whatever you want to say. And we lose track of that easily in finance. And I think that and that's just a cultural change that has to evolve as well. And maybe that would probably be my magic wand if I had one, but unfortunately I don't. Well, thank you, Wai-Shin. It was great talking to you, and thanks everyone for tuning in. This podcast is just one way ED4S supports sustainability education. Follow us on LinkedIn or connect directly to stay updated on future learning opportunities. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
If today's episode sparked ideas for your team, visit ed4s.org. That's ed4s.org to explore our customizable corporate learning solutions or book a quick discovery call. You don't have to figure it out alone.